Hi guys. I'm gonna try to be kind of short and sweet with this, with the terms today, but and hopefully that'll work out. It's gonna be kind of quite a bit of terms, so I'm gonna try to get this out as soon as possible. If you guys have any questions, let me know. And so here we go. So I'm gonna start with salon. And basically, a salon is a public large exhibition. It was also known as an annual exhibition of works of art by living artists. So during the 19th century, it became a focal point for artistic controversy and was identified with academicism and official hostility to progress in art. So things that associate with salon is the Salon de Refuse or Avant Garde, which I will talk about later. The salon-style hanging is obviously a style of hanging that was in the salon. And so what we noticed about salon style was according to the hierarchy of genre. So what I mean by that is the styles, like the style of hanging was according to the hierarchy of genre. So for example, like the largest like historic paintings would be on top, and then the bottom ones would be still lifes. And of course, the large paintings usually were on top because they took up the most room. And since they were usually history paintings, that kind of worked and fit. And not only that, but we have to see this in terms of the Enlightenment. So visually how we displayed it, it's a pseudo-scientific way of ordering the world. So the organization is very much associated with the Enlightenment as well. And if you guys need some recap on the Enlightenment and the hierarchy of genre, go back to my previous video when I talked about all those terms as well. So the Grand Tour is kind of a concept in the 19th century when a man, in this case, would turn 18. Before you became a lawyer or other success, you would take a quote-unquote gap year, which is about 2 to 3 years, where you traveled around and experienced the world, and most of the time it would be going to Italy. Now, women could do this, but they had to have a chaperone with them at the time. They also emphasized that this Grand Tour was for educated people, so if you were educated, you had to tour Italy. Okay, so the Tableau Vivant, it's pretty much an extravagant party where you would dress up as figures from art, like famous art pieces, or just from ancient history of art, so maybe like Venus or something like that. And you would get posed behind a curtain, and so it would be opened, and you would pose as mostly as a Renaissance painting for ancient sculpture. So some of the art they were mimicking was nude, but that was acceptable because they were posing as someone else. They were literally disguising themselves as someone else. Just to recap, a history painting, which is going to be significant for a lot of pieces in Romanticism. It's supposed to refer to ancient history, not recent modern history, and it's supposed to be an example of virtue, and also it's very huge. So that's also kind of another recap. So ancient history, it cannot be recent, and these were the rules of the academic art and the hierarchy of genre. Can't be about contemporary art. Now, of course, we know that's not the case later, but I think this is very significant right now. Okay, so Romanticism. So we've been kind of talking about neoclassicism, especially in my last video and within class, which obviously we know it really emerged from the Enlightenment ideals. So the idea of looking back into the Renaissance as it looked back to the ancient world. So neoclassicism was about conceptualizing culture. It was also a sort of fashion statement, so like the Tableau Vivant. The subject matter always had to involve ancient themes. And they also, the technique matter in terms of application of paint, for example, it was very thin glaces of paint application. And there was no gestural brush strokes. So what you see is very linear and hard-looking depiction of the subject matter. It's just very hard-edged compared to what you see in Romantic painting. So in contrast, Romanticism was a reaction to the neoclassical world. The subject matter was not ancient, but more importantly, it was exotic. So this is a very poignant characteristic of Romanticism, and it also relates to Exoticism, which I will talk about later. And the painting technique is also another contrast to the neoclassic approach. It's pretty gestural, or maybe really like bold color schemes, and maybe atmospheric. If you look at Turner, you can see that he's definitely the epitome of a romantic painter. So Romanticism also emphasized tragedy, victims, emotionalism, chaos over order, and also the power of the natural world. So whereas, human beings controlled nature, in this case it's reversed. So, sorry. Romanticism in the 19th century was a reaction to the Enlightenment overall. So it's based on subject matter of nature versus humanity, like I emphasized before. Because, like a hurricane, that everything is rational. That kind of sounds like a line to a song. Okay, so I mentioned the term exoticism, and it's literally the charm of the unfamiliar. So it relates to the idea of romanticism where, you see something you've never seen before, it's very unfamiliar. So what I think of is odalisque, or like just very, what's the word to say? Just very foreign, I guess, paintings. So the odalisque was kind of a representation of a Turkish woman, even though she was a French woman. But that kind of represents exoticism. Okay, I'm going to recap on picturesque because that's really significant in a lot of pictures, especially when we go to sublime and beautiful. So again, it literally means like a picture. So a landscape that looks like a picture. People begin to look and paint a landscape, and you were supposed to understand them as both being constructions. So if you're out in the wilderness and you see a scene, you think, boy, that looks like a painting, or a picture. So landscapes look like paintings, not the other way around, and that's what made picturesque images very interesting, because it wasn't reversed. They wouldn't go to a landscape and be like, oh, or they wouldn't look at a painting and be like, that looks like a landscape. They would usually be reversed. It's a very interesting point of view. Again, how to make a picturesque landscape. There had to be a patch of land in the foreground, so you had to have a psychological place to enter. The people in the painting are supposed to be you, specifically. And either side of the paintings were known as bookends, and the painting was usually framed by like a tree or something like that. It just kind of gave that, it helped lead the eye forward, like you were going on a hike. Again, it was a metaphor for traversing through space. And the leading characteristic of picturesque landscapes are irregularity, roughness, and variety. And the more wild areas of the British Isles specifically, if you're talking about like British paintings, that's where a lot of picturesque paintings came from in Britain, I believe. So I mentioned the sublime and beautiful. In the case of beautiful, it's being pleasing to the senses in some way, and evoking kind of an overwhelming loftiness or vastness, either in ideas, art, nature, or experience. And that was the sublime. I'm sorry, let me emphasize. So beautiful is being pleasing to the senses in some way, and sublime is evoking an overwhelming loftiness or vastness, which is either nature, ideas, art, or experience. So those are the two differences. I mean, I know they're kind of simplifying terms that have been kind of hotly debated in philosophical circles for hundreds of years, and especially, I believe, in art historians. But kind of for the purposes of this, I think it's necessary to compare them on a fundamental level, and just kind of understand the basics. So you often hear kind of the beautiful, the sublime, and the picturesque. And this kind of summarizes the history of the three terms. as they relate to British and American landscape painting. So it describes paintings in the beautiful tradition as containing serene, calm landscapes consisting of idealized natural forms arranged in a balanced composition. Picturesque paintings depicted rough, craggy trees and foliage, sharp contrasts of light and shadow, and rustic anecdotes. And so the emphasis in these paintings was on the variety and contrast of visible rather than idealized nature. And so finally, sublime painting is discussed in this way, where you talk about terror and wonder engendered with the emotional basis of sublime aesthetic response to wild nature. So tremendous mountains, deep valleys, cataclysmic storms. Kind of sounds familiar, sounds pretty romantic. So you notice a lot of picturesque schemes in romantic art being sublime, because those were typical subjects of sublime landscapes. Okay. So realism is related to the subject matter rather than how it's painted. And a way to understand this is realism in the way it's painted has a lowercase r, whereas this one has an uppercase r, so just remember that. And Courbet specifically described it as not to look real necessarily, but rather depicting real subjects. So again, realism comes out of Romanticism in the way it's painted. So in this case, the image is very painterly. When I'm in the painting I'm talking about is the Stonebreakers. And that's when you really see the term realism. So Courbet wasn't interested in painting heroes or even victims or important people, really. He was only interested in painting the average man in life. He wanted to depict the event of everyday life in contrast to all the heroic scenes that Romanticism painted. So it was very